Welcome everyone to the Sumer Sports Show. Hope everyone is doing really well today. I am your host today, Tate Seth. Parker Fleming, my usual co-host on these Wednesday shows, is traveling actually to Atlanta, where I am right now for a Sumer Sports company on site, which should be really exciting to have everyone who works in our team here, and we'll make sure to be posting pictures and doing stuff online for that. But I'm really excited today because we have a really great guest here to talk to us today about a lot of different topics. I am here with Pro Football Focus's Amelia Probst. Amelia is one of the most impressive young people in the sports analytics industry, and we will go through all of her background and her general thoughts on football and everything related to that today. Amelia, how are you?
Hey, Tej, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And like I mentioned, I think that based on everything that you've done so far, you are like one of the more accomplished people in sports analytics and football analytics especially, and someone that I talk to very often and I'm always learning stuff from. So really excited to do this show with you today. So just for everyone who needs a refresher, Amelia was a statistics major at Cornell University, and she was an analyst for Cornell's lacrosse team there. Then she did an internship with the New York Mets. She also did an internship for the Premier Lacrosse League, and now she's a data scientist at PFF. So, Amelia, if you want to fill in any of the gaps, there's a lot that you've done so far, but I think it's all been very impressive.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very nice of you to say. I think you pretty much summarized it. But yeah, I've worked in a few different sports, starting in lacrosse, made my way to baseball, and now I'm back to football. And I guess one thing to add, I was also like a volunteer analyst essentially for the Indianapolis Colts in their 2021 season. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot from working in different sports and seeing the similarities and applying some of the things I've learned from either baseball or lacrosse to football now. So that's been a lot of fun. And some of the work that I've done while I've been at PFF, I hit my 1 year anniversary in June. But a few things that I've worked on were the first research piece I did was on offensive line volatility with Dr. Eric Eager, who is also at Sumer. And then I did some daily power rankings, other articles here and there, and hoping to produce some more research and content in the next few months or so. And obviously during the season, I'll still be producing content. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Hmm. Yeah, no, glad to hear, and yeah, all that content's been great. So, I mean, I really like hearing about this from someone who works in sports analytics. Like, when was the kind of like the moment you realized you like really like sports, and then like when did the sports analytics side of things factor into it, where you kind of were able to come to realization where you can use all the statistics and the math that you were learning in school and apply it to like football or just any sport in general.
Yeah, so my first year at Cornell, I was actually an engineering major. So I realized pretty quickly on that that was not for me, but I loved like the math aspect of it. So that's where I decided to go into statistics. And then obviously later down the road when I started thinking about, jobs or internships, I have always been into sports, like playing sports, watching sports. I'm an avid Bills fan, fortunately and unfortunately at times. So yeah, I thought if I could combine like my love for sports and then my love for math or statistics specifically, like that would be awesome. So I kind of just reached out to people in the field in sports analytics and looked for jobs and things like that, and just got lucky. And then once I really got into it, I realized that this is something that I could see myself doing long term. And I was having a lot of fun while doing it. So I realized that's when I wanted to like seriously pursue it.
Mhm. That makes sense for sure. And you mentioned that you were like an avid Bills fan growing up, and a lot of your family was as well. Was that like a big influence in getting into sports analytics? Was you guys just loved going to Bills games, watching the Bills together, and then it ended up leading to where what you're working in now?
Yeah, for sure. I would say like because I grew up in like the Rex Ryan, EJ Manuel, Tyler Taylor era, which was not the most fun. But I feel like I always watched games kind of from like analytical perspective. Like I wanted to know more what was going on like behind the scenes, like why things were happening. And I didn't really realize it until I got into sports analytics more that that's what I was like looking for in the games. Um, And I think that's something that really influenced me. And obviously, like, my dad is from Buffalo and is the reason why, like, I'm a Bills fan. So he definitely encouraged me to pursue sports analytics. So he has someone to, like, talk about sports with every day. But I actually haven't been to a Bills home game yet, so that's a goal that I have. Maybe in the next few years, we'll see.
Yeah, oh yeah, we definitely have to get you to a Bills home game. Preferably one in like September or October. I don't know if you can prefer the cold maybe or whatever, but if I was going to a Bills game, it would definitely be in the warmer weather areas because those snow games they look like they're a lot of fun when you're watching on TV, but I'm sure they're kind of a grind when you're there in person.
Yeah, I'm not a huge, like, snow or, like, cold weather person, so I'd prefer to early in the season, but, can't necessarily choose that. And Buffalo weather is very unpredictable anyways, so you could get snow pretty early. Um, but yeah, hopefully I can get to one soon. But I think tickets are pretty popular and hard to come by. So yeah, we'll see.
It's always interesting to see the progression of like when a team that was kind of middle of the pack or below average for so long become really good and how excited the community gets about that. I think the Bills have experienced that in the past couple of years. You mentioned like the Tyrod Taylor era, and now you've transitioned into this Josh Allen era where you're competing for the one seed in the AFC every year. And just like how excited Bills fans have become about the team going forward. And we really felt that last offseason where the Bills were favorites to win the Super Bowl. Josh Allen was favorite to win MVP. And we saw a lot of that materialize throughout the season. They open up the season beating the defending Super Bowl Rams in Los Angeles by a pretty big margin. And then they kind of continue that throughout the season where they're taking apart most teams, but because of Josh Allen's elbow injury and I think some of the injuries that happened on defense, and not even downplaying the Damar Hamlin injury, which took a huge mental toll on the team. All of these things I think kind of snowballed together, and like that playoff game against the Bengals ended up being one that just like really got away from them. Do you think recency bias is playing into how people are viewing the Bills this season?
I definitely think so, but like you said, throughout the whole season, there have been just like kind of compounding factors. So I think
Mhm.
it's just a lot for them to handle throughout like the whole season. And obviously, I think a lot of the pressure has been placed on Josh Allen specifically, which is not good for him or the team. So I think all of those things together, like people are just generally disappointed. Like they just had really high expectations for them, which is great. But I think there's definitely room for improvement. And I think as long as, Josh Allen doesn't continue to make like costly turnovers and like if they're not asking too much of him and they improve their offensive line and things like that, I think they're definitely on a good track, obviously. But I think, like you said, the recency bias, like, all the drama with Stephon Diggs,
Mhm.
like doesn't put them in a good light necessarily, but I don't think that will hinder them once the season starts for sure.
Mhm. That's a great point, and I think like the points that you talk about with Josh Allen, where he has that very volatile play aspect to him, where we see some games or even some drives where he gains all of the available yards on his own, whether it's through passing, scrambles, or design rushing. But then there's some drives where he fumbles the ball, at the -1 yard line, or throws a costly interception. And I know you've done a lot of work in volatility on offensive line and on quarterbacks. Is there value in having a volatile quarterback in regards to winning the Super Bowl? Or is it better to have more of a consistent quarterback, even if they can't reach those ceilings? Like, how do you kind of see that trade off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends which side of the volatility you're talking about. Like if you're volatile but like positively volatile, if that makes sense. Like you're
Mhm.
have like really extreme performances on like, scoring lots of touchdowns, whatever, and like low probability um like plays, I guess, or like low probability chances of that happening. I think that's great. But then if you're on the other end, not so much. So I think you could like see the example of like Kirk Cousins. Like obviously the Vikings haven't like
Mhm.
done super great with him so far, but um like they're usually, around the 500 mark. So he's very consistent, and sure he makes mistakes, but not at the same rate as like Josh Allen does. So I think like looking at him as like, you know, your average and like average volatile quarterback. I think, in my personal opinion, I'd rather have someone who's like average and like not super volatile in like either way than someone who's really unpredictable and like is more likely than not going to be volatile in a negative way. So I think it really just depends on the way you look at it, and obviously you have to take into account other factors. But at least if we're just talking about the quarterbacks, I think like an average like volatile quarterback is definitely better than someone who's volatile in like the negative sense more than anything.
That makes sense for sure. And we and us that work in football analytics, we have the Patrick Mahomes test where if you're working on anything quarterback related, he should be in the top right of the graph or number one in your metric. I think the Kirk Cousins test also applies to a lot of this stuff, or just the Minnesota Vikings test in general, where if you're working on it, they should be average to above average in a lot of the things that you're working on. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, before we move on to like the rest of the AFC East, I think like and a lot of people watching this are probably realizing this, but like the way that you're able to talk about different concepts in football analytics, like volatility and such, like a lot of it stems from other sports. So since you did so many things for so many different other sports, whether it's lacrosse and or baseball or different stuff, how do you feel like that's helped you in becoming like a football analyst?
Yeah, so I think I've gotten to see different perspectives, like you said, and see the similarities between sports, which then helps me like apply different methods, whether that's like statistical or not, to football. And I think it just gives me a different perspective, so I'm not, you know, on like a one track mind all the time. So I think that's really important. And obviously, like baseball is pretty far advanced in terms of analytics compared to football. So I think seeing where baseball and like working in baseball and seeing how far ahead they are of even like the NFL, like gives me like a drive to try to continue to do work that is like going towards where baseball is. And I think it just takes time. So I think those are the biggest influences that I've gotten from working in other sports. But this applies to all sports as well. Like it's always changing. There's always like something new to look at or like research, whether it's like baseball or lacrosse or football. So I think that's just kind of the mindset I've had going into working at PFF, is that there's always going to be something new for me to work on, and I think that's been a good and a bad influence, I guess, because there's always things to work on, but it's hard to choose or like narrow it down a little bit. But yeah, I think working in different sports has definitely given me a interesting perspective, and has definitely influenced like the way I look at football specifically.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely feel that. And Udit, who's been on the show before and is one of our friends, always says like the biggest problem with working in football is there's not enough time to do everything that you want to do. And I think that really echoes like kind of your kind of what you're feeling about that as well. But so is that been like your biggest takeaway from working in football analytics full time or working at PFF is that it's like really hard to kind of exactly nail down what you want to work on, or is there something else that's kind of stuck with you throughout these last couple of years?
Yeah, I would say that, and like similar to like that sports are always changing, like access to data, like we have so much access and
Mhm.
that's great, but it can also be overwhelming. So like narrowing it down to what you really need to look at or what's like important can be difficult, and definitely something I've learned. And then on top of this, like knowing how to convey your ideas or opinions or models or whatever you're trying to convey in a way that's easy for anyone to understand, not just someone with a statistical background. That's something that I would say I worked on while I was still in college, as well as like my time at PFF, especially like when I'm writing content. Like I'm not going to put information about my model in there because
Mhm.
the average reader is not going to care about that. But that's something that I think is interesting. So it's always a matter of like weighing what you want to include and what you don't want to include, and how can you write it or display it with a graphic that's easy to understand, because people have very strong opinions about your work and will give you feedback on it, whether that's on Twitter or emailing you or whatever it is. So you'll definitely get lots of feedback on your work if you don't display it correctly. So that's been fun. And so learning how to deal with feedback, as well as like knowing how to convey ideas, are things that I feel like I've worked on in the past few years. So I think those have been a few challenges and like things that I've definitely learned a lot from.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think that's really cool to kind of hear your process and your journey when you go through making models and then taking the results from those models and putting it into content that people can read and thinking about what the average reader wants versus readers who are more data focused versus
Mhm.
readers who are more film focused. So that I like kind of the way you put that for sure. We got some really good questions in the chat here. This one's from Ivan Patel, and we can talk about both of these. And for anyone else listening live on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitch right now, like feel free to leave any questions in the chat for us to talk about. So Ivan Patel goes that he knows that you got the inspiration for offensive line volatility from Bill Preddy's work on hitter volatility from baseball, and he's wondering what are some other examples or ideas from analytics in other sports that can be applied to football. Do you have any immediate thoughts that come to mind here for this question?
Well, my first thought is not something that I've personally worked on, but something that exists in baseball and football is WAR. So the wins above average or wins above replacement, sorry, not wins above average, wins above replacement stat or metric. Those are used in baseball and football and have been applied pretty well, I would say. That's the first that comes on at the top of my head, but I can't think of any that I would apply right now. But I know there are tons of other like either economics or like principles that have been applied to sports as well. Like in my offensive line volatility article, I use the Gini indices, which are like technically a economics like metric. So I think you can apply like processes or statistics like across like academics and sports, if that makes sense. Like I wouldn't just limit yourself. And I think specifically talking about like economics, like just the topic of game theory is definitely something that is used in sports analytics. And obviously we all know Moneyball. And that is like pretty much, I would say, economically founded because you're trying to get the most value for the least money. So I think those things have been applied in football, whether that's as a GM or an analyst, and are things to like consider in the future. Other than that, I can't think of other topics that I would necessarily apply from other sports to football specifically. Tej, I don't know if you have any thoughts or anything you want to add to there.
Yeah, wins above replacement is definitely the big answer here for sure. But I do think that there are like a lot of things to get from baseball analytics, from basketball analytics. The problem with football, and we've talked about this a ton, is since the plays are continuous and like lasting over 3 4 seconds, and they're interconnected. Like it's a network where each of the 22 players on the field are connected in some sort of way. It's not like baseball where it's an isolation sport that has a stop start ability to it. So it's a little bit tougher for sure. But like I think of plus minus from basketball and from hockey. That is something that is being eventually applied to football. Kevin Cole on his Substack has done great work on EPA plus minus, and that's something I think can be really interesting. And then yeah, like you mentioned with Moneyball, like just thinking about roster building from a wins to dollars perspective, where you assign a value to a player from a wins perspective, and you think about how many dollars is that win worth, and then team building from that is really cool. So there are definitely lots of cool examples of that. And when you look at football analytics as a landscape right now, I think like baseball, basketball, hockey, the other main sports in America are definitely ahead. And that's what I think can make football really cool is baseball has already gone through the trials of what works, what doesn't work, what's predictive, and hopefully football can take lessons from that and learn from it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that'll be interesting. But thanks for the question, Ivan. We have another question here from Mojol, who's frequent commenter. Always appreciate their comments on this show. He's asking, as an analyst, do you let data lead to a hypothesis or vice versa?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on the situation, but I would say like if I'm thinking about a research topic, like usually I'll come up with a hypothesis first and then figure out if the data supports that or not. But sometimes like things will come up where I'm doing something like totally separate and I come across data or like a graph that I make or something like that that it interests me and like makes me want to delve into a different topic. So I would say it really just depends on what I'm doing. like if I'm brainstorming ideas or working on something currently. So it really just depends. But yeah, I don't think one way is like right. And Tage, you can also like say your opinion on this too, as I'm sure you've done like plenty of research. But yeah, like for example, with my offensive line volatility article, like I started out with a hypothesis first, and like a process, and then kind of went into validating it.
Mm. I totally agree with you. I think that there's multiple ways to get to kind of a conclusion, right? Like a lot of times, like you mentioned, you do start off with a hypothesis, and that stems from watching football, listening to other podcasts, watching talk shows. Like there's a lot of ways that I think hypotheses can come from,
Mm-hmm.
and like just kind of being involved in the sport is one of those ways. So you can get something like if you're watching a game and you're thinking, wow, like play action seems to be really successful. Like I see it work more oftentimes than not. Like it gets first downs pretty often. And this is just an observation. You can go into the data and check and see does play action actually lead to a higher success rate, a higher expected points
Mm-hmm.
added on each play. And the data would confirm that. Or there's other ways where you're playing around with the data and you're just filtering based on different parameters and just working with a rich data set like you mentioned earlier, and you get some type of output that's surprising to you, and then that's where you can kind of go back the other way and come up with a hypothesis that's not really a hypothesis because you've already looked at the data. So I think it is kind of cool to see the paths that people do when they get to different areas of looking at different metrics and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
And I think one thing to add onto this as well that you mentioned, like sometimes I'll listen to a podcast or like the commentators on a game, and they'll talk about something, and I'll like write an idea down that they mentioned that maybe has already been looked into, but it's still kind of cool. I don't have any on the top of my head, but sometimes I'll just get inspiration from those people because Tage, I'm sure you can agree with me on this, that you can get lost in the data a little bit, or
Yeah.
like be stuck and not really know what to do next. So sometimes getting inspiration from other people is definitely helpful. So maybe someone that has like outside perspective as well. So that's been something that I've tried to do as well.
Hmm. I'm totally with you there. Like I think, yeah, there's when you're watching games, or even Eric and I were talking about this yesterday. When you stay in touch with like your friends from high school or your friends from college that maybe didn't follow football as closely as you and decided to pursue other paths, hearing their perspectives is sometimes really helpful because, like you said, like we can get so lost in the data and just talking to football analytics people that all think in a similar way. Like it's not a hive mind, but there's all like similar thought processes going
Yeah.
on. And when I talk to maybe some of my friends from high school and they have totally different perspectives that I wouldn't have even thought of, like they're not always maybe the most optimal way of thinking and like, factoring it, but they factor in things that maybe I haven't been thinking of just by looking at the data mainly. So I think yeah, hearing different perspectives from commentators, from people that you talk to is very important.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So before we get into talking about the rest of the AFC East and some general running back and salary cap talk, I do have to mention that Circa Sports is doing a Circus Survivor contest this year. It's in Las Vegas. It's coming back for the fifth year, and there's 14 million guaranteed in prizes. So if you enter in Vegas, you can play from anywhere with two ways to win the prize and no rake. So you can play the Circa Million Pro Football Contest with 6 million in total prizes with quarterly payouts and 100% payback. The top prize is 1 million guaranteed. And then if you pick a winner with Circus Survivor, which is the biggest prize yet, that's $8 million guaranteed. Select one team each week with no point spread. So, Amelia, you were talking about the game theory earlier. There's a lot of game theory that has to go into here, is thinking about which teams you want to select relative to which teams other people are going to select. I know that our friend Judah Fortgang has done some research on that. So, I think that it's based on this money, based on Circa Million, Circa Survivor, Pro Football Contest. If you play for the share of the 14 million in guaranteed prizes, I think that's really exciting. And enter in Vegas and play from anywhere. Eric Parker and I cannot participate in this because of policies that we have here at Sumer, but we will be in Vegas in August during week 0 of college football. I think it's the August 26th weekend. So, be sure to check us out there, and you can come hang out with us, watch some week 0. Caleb Williams is playing that weekend. It's Navy's first game with a new head coach against Notre Dame. So there'll be some good football on that we can watch at Circus Swim, and then you can enter there to play in this contest. So anyone out there, feel free to do that as well. Amelia, let's dive into AFC East talk. So, I think whenever anything Bills related happens, you are the first person I always have to text, because you are the biggest Bills fan I know, and like the biggest expert on the team. So we talked a little Bills earlier, but I want to hear your thoughts on overall AFC East. Who do you see as the biggest threat to the Bills this year? They are the favorites to win the division, but if they were to not to win the division, who do you think it could be?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think the Jets, especially if Aaron Rodgers is good, he's their biggest threat. I don't see the Patriots being a big threat just because they don't have a solid quarterback, but they do have a new offensive coordinator, so definitely possible. Bill Belichick always has something up his sleeve, but not too confident in Mac Jones at the moment. But yeah, Jets for sure, because like, even though he's on a new team, like we've seen examples of quarterbacks switching teams and winning Super Bowls. So it's definitely possible, like Brady and Stafford. And then Hackett is their new, Nathaniel Hackett's a new offensive coordinator who worked with Aaron Rodgers. So I think he has a good supporting cast around him. And especially like their defense is like sneakily good. Well, not even sneakily good, like good. And they have weapons like all over the field, like Quinnen Williams, Sauce Gardner, the usual people. So, and I think the Jets have really taken advantage of like the draft and free agency and have developed over the past few years, like slowly but steadily. So I think, I don't know if this is their peak yet, but they could definitely do well, especially if Aaron Rodgers stays the same. I know his WAR has been declining over the past like few years, but I think even if he's stable, I think that's good. And he's like he's not very turnover worthy prone or anything like that. So I think they have a solid shot. But it'll be interesting because we meaning the Bills play the Jets week 1. So that'll be interesting to see how training camp and everything else has been going, if Rodgers has good chemistry with the receivers. So yeah, I'm worried mostly about the Jets. And the Dolphins are definitely a threat too, but I think they really depend on if Tua is healthy. And I know they did add Jalen Ramsey, which is great, but I don't think that will dramatically change their games. So we'll have to see. But I know our friend Haley will be happy to hear that I consider the Jets a
For sure. And yeah, I think a lot of the points that you bring up are valid there, right? Like the Bills only lost 3 regular season games last year. One was week 3 to the Dolphins, losing by 2 points in Miami. It was a weird game based on like the heat and everything involved in that, but the Bills ended up losing that one. And then week 9, they ended up losing by 3 points to the Jets on the road. And the Jets didn't even have Aaron Rodgers there yet, but like still had that defense. So I do like those options as like threats to kind of take down the Bills this year. I agree with you that even though I think the Patriots could be a pretty good team this year just because of some additions that they made, I don't know if they're set up to beat the Bills anymore like they used to, because we've seen the Bills for basically like 4 straight games now kind of be able to do whatever they wanted to the Patriots on offense. And you go back to that really windy game 3 years ago where the Patriots were able to win that one just because the Bills weren't able to pass at all in that game. But like ever since that game, when you include the late season game they played that year, the playoff game where the Bills had one of the best offensive performances in NFL history, and then the 2 games last year where they were able to beat the Patriots pretty handily, I start to see that the path is going to go through Miami and New York for the Bills this year. And what I think is really interesting is that week 1 game, like you mentioned, like that's going to be a big test for Aaron Rodgers and how well he kind of has made the chemistry with his receivers over the offseason, right? When you look at Russell Wilson last year joining a new team. His week one performance was actually pretty good relative to the rest of the season. He had a positive EPA per play in that game. He gelled well with his receivers. So I think that's like kind of a prior you can work off of with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, but it's really tough with a quarterback that is has been declining the past couple of years, like you said.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like you said with the Patriots, I don't know if predictable is the right word, but for whatever reason, the Bills have been able to figure out their defense a little more. So I think it'll be interesting to see if the Patriots switch anything up on defense to see if they can, get us stuck a little bit. But I'm not too confident that the Patriots will be able to do that. But there's definitely some bias in my answer, so I take it into account.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It was hard for me to come on here and say nice things about the Packers as a Lions fan. The in the past couple of years when Aaron Rodgers was winning MVPs, and I did have to admit that they're one of the better teams in the NFL. So I know that now that the Bills have kind of taken the AFC East the last couple of years, it's a lot easier to say stuff about the Patriots. I'm sure
Yeah.
as that division's kind of shifted, but yeah. So another thing I want to talk about is the Bills got a lot of too high looks last year with two high safeties. We talked about this with Cody Alexander and Sean Syed on previous shows, and I think the Bills' answer to that the last 2 years has been just Josh Allen designed runs, and that's a lot of usage on Josh Allen. He ended up getting the elbow injury last year that they would, most likely want to avoid this year with less usage on him. So, do you see the Bills drafting Dalton Kincaid in the first round as a sign they're going to use more 12 personnel with him and Dawson Knox, or do you see a different solution to how they're going to use the 12 personnel?
Well, so I definitely hope so because I think having Knox and Kincaid, and especially using Kincaid as like maybe a slot, would be great. And I know last year at least the Bills only used 12 personnel at like 6% or 6% rate, which is like second to last in the NFL. So I guess anything would be better than that. But and they played 11 personnel at like 72% last year, which is sixth in the NFL. So I think especially with the addition of Kincaid and his like skill, I feel like they have to. And I just think Knox and Kincaid together would be just an awesome combo because we know what Knox can do. So I think it just kind of remains to be seen, but it's hard for me to believe that they won't use a weapon like Kincaid personally.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what I think is going to be the really interesting thing is tight ends take a little bit longer than other positions to kind of get acclimated to the NFL. And like I think if you listen to the way that like a lot of tight ends talk about it, you really have to learn two positions or three positions in one. You have to learn how to play receiver and offensive lineman, and sometimes some type of fullback or swing tackle position where you're shifting sides, and that's what I think makes tight end a lot harder to really get acclimated and to hit their peak in the league. But when you look at someone like Kincaid and you talked about how he can be used in the slot right away, maybe he just has to learn the receiver part of playing
Mm-hmm.
tight end at the beginning of the season. Dawson Knox can take on a lot of the blocking responsibilities, but the Bills just having two players out there that are going to be bigger than most linebackers and most defensive backs that can also catch should give them the numbers advantage. And then you can throw on the Josh Allen rushes on top of that because
Mm-hmm.
we still know he has that ability. Maybe they just want to use it less this year. So I think when you start to put all that stuff together, you can really see an offense that is going to be really special as it was last year. And I still think that the Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs connection is one of the more unstoppable connections in all of the
Mm-hmm.
NFL. So you can see all of these things kind of being put together. I'm sure Ken Dorsey is having a lot of fun, like drawing up the offense this offseason.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen Kincaid be compared to Travis Kelce, which if he's the next Travis Kelce, that would be awesome. But I won't like bet anything on that. And I know like Kincaid had really successful seasons. Like he's the first or the only Division One tight end to have 4 seasons with 8 or more receiving touchdowns over the last 25 seasons, which is pretty impressive. And I think, like you said, hopefully, using 12 personnel more and then maybe not running Josh as much, because sometimes he's made some pretty risky like slides and things like that, which is never good to see. And I know we added Damian Harris in free agency, so hopefully like adding another like running back will allow Allen to like limit his rushing attempts. Not that he's not good at it, but I just think he should leave that to some other guys personally.
Yeah, the Damian Harris signing is, yeah, I think like a sneaky under the radar signing that probably isn't being talked enough about. Just to shoulder the workload, getting another running back in there to kind of like make sure that, yeah, like you mentioned, like Josh Allen isn't always running with the ball, and that doesn't always have to be the solution to that. But yeah, I mean, just talking about the running back landscape as a whole, I know this is a very, very popular topic this week based on some of the recent news behind Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs and other running backs in the league, where they are going to play on the franchise tag this year. An extension was not reached by either team to either running back. So what are some of your general thoughts on that news specifically before we talk about running back contracts as a whole?
Yeah, so I think it's hard just because the whole system kind of hurts running backs in their contracts, just because they do decline in value and like efficiency as they age. So it's hard for teams to like justify paying them a lot. But I think like one solution is maybe like drafting them, or like earlier in college, or they become free agents, and then maybe there's like a player pool and you get to choose from them, or you're given money to pay for like a running back specifically as like a free agent. But I don't think there's like one solution. It's not a quick process to change for sure. And I guess another option that our good friend John Taormina, who was a guest previously on here, his idea was basically making like year 3 and 4 player options in a rookie deal, and then the market will adjust. So I don't know if teams would like that or if the league would like that, but there are definitely other options out there to like protect running backs physically and like monetarily for sure.
100%. And I like a lot of what you laid out there. And yeah, I mean, that's true where it's like running backs are most productive and play at the highest level in areas where the chances are they're not making much money in college football. If you look at the spread of a metric like rushing yards over expected, or even yards per carry, but rushing yards over expected should adjust for opponent, which kind of gives us what we want here. There is a much bigger spread for running backs that get drafted if you look at their rushing yards over expected versus NFL running backs. So you're looking at a similar pool of running backs. You can see a much wider variance. Running backs are able to average 2.53 rushing yards over what's expected of them from an average running back in college, while that goes down to about 0.5 to 1 in the NFL. And so you can see these running backs like Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs like dominate and take over games in college that we see less often in the NFL. So if they were to get compensated there more, that would be a lot helpful. But that's in the hands of NIL. That's not something that the NFL can control. But that's why those player options become really interesting, right? Because there shouldn't be a running back specific solution that gets implemented, because you don't want to live in a world where the run game makes a huge comeback and now you have this solution in there that might end up hurting them in the future if all of a sudden they are one of the more valuable positions in the NFL. But I do like you bringing up that player option where if a running back after 2 years is like a Jonathan Taylor type, where he has this amazing sophomore season and cements himself as one of the better running backs in the NFL, he can opt out of his third year of his rookie deal, get a new extension, and get his cash flow going earlier instead of having to play last year on his rookie deal and having to deal with that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, like you said, I don't think the league is going to change back to like a running league. Like the NFL is now like a passing league, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And obviously we've seen examples where like you can win the Super Bowl without an elite running back. Like the Chiefs had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and like he's like pretty average, like not great. And then they had Pacheco. So I think you just have to take advantage of the market, and especially rookies, and like drafting them out of college. And I think that's where you're going to get the most productivity out of them. So yeah, I don't know what will end up happening, but yeah, it'll be interesting. And I know there's been plenty of lashback from not just running backs, but players in the NFL in general. So I totally understand where they're coming from, but yeah, I don't think it's something that's going to change overnight.
Mm. For sure, and it's unfortunate that in a salary capped league, or we live in just like a society in general where it's you only have a limited amount of money, and like the team's goals at the end of the day is are maximizing their expected wins per dollar. Like how much can you do from an expected wins perspective, and building your roster and getting the right coaching staff in place, while also making sure you stay under the salary cap and are not spending a ton of cash, and like that's what the owners prefer. So there's always going to be certain positions that become more or less valued because of just how we live, and it happens to be running backs right now, and that's the tough part to see is like there are some people bringing up how centers are underpaid, for example, in the NFL, which is probably true. Like compared to the value that centers are giving, maybe they are underpaid, but like they've kind of stayed more stable in their growth, where it's like centers have maybe consistently been underpaid for the past 10, 15 years, while running backs have been higher, one of the more higher paid positions 10,
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago to now, where they're starting to become one of the lesser paid positions. And that's what I think is the striking reality right now for these players is they when they were in high school or middle school and choosing to play running back, they were looking forward to, maybe they necessarily weren't thinking about like what they were going to make in the NFL, but they like knew that it was going to be a position that was going to be very well compensated, and now it's still pretty well compensated, but just not at the point that it used to be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I'm that's a tough change for anyone, but when they're making millions of dollars, it's hard for me to say there's a huge difference between them making
Mm.
$30 million versus like $28 million a year. So um, I think it's just kind of reached that point where the players are going to have to be unhappy enough that like the union or someone like that, like the NFLPA, like does something about it. Because I don't think anything's going to happen without that.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think like there are like things to pick and choose from the last CBA that was negotiated that could have put certain like positions that don't get as much money as other positions into a better spot that maybe wasn't done by the NFLPA. And there are some people that are pretty good like experts at that type of stuff. But I also think like moving away from doing something like changing the rookie wage scale, or that's handled, or changing the draft, there's rule changes that the NFL could make as well. Like we were talking about other sports earlier, like baseball went through and banned the shift this year, and that was like a certain rule change that they made, or speeding up the pace of play by implementing a pitch clock made it harder for these pitchers to kind of mess with the batters and get them out of rhythm. So the NFL is a little bit slower from a rules change perspective than maybe like a sport like basketball, but I could see them starting to implement certain rules like limiting how much you're able to do the quarterback sneak, because if the quarterback sneak wasn't maybe a thing in general. Like I'm not saying to get rid of it. I'm saying it's a possible option. If you get rid of the quarterback sneak, then you're going to be using running backs in that situation. So that's immediately some value added back in. Or you find ways to decrease the value of passing game. You allow defensive backs to be more physical. You call less pass interferences, which the league really likes scoring. So it's tough to see them do something that takes away
Mhm.
scoring, but that's also something that they could implement. But I think like the overall just problem right now is the running game still can be valuable from time to time, but it's just like the individual sum of parts that you're getting from that running game are just more replaceable than it used to be, which
Mhm.
makes some of those rule changes harder as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the rule changes, at least for me, it's hard for me to see that happening unless like it's deemed unsafe or something like that for the quarterback sneak specifically. But I do think like if you ban the quarterback sneak, like that would put more emphasis on like running back importance and would make them feel a little better, I guess. But then I guess it would also limit like the rushing attempts for quarterbacks. So I don't know if, like Lamar and Kyler, like they're known as, like rushing a little bit. So not all quarterbacks may want this, but at the same time, like it's not really up to them. So yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see what ends up happening. And I've seen tons of different opinions on this. Like Mina Kimes has posted her own thing. I know Eric has posted his own thing. So I'm curious to see if the NFL ends up doing something about it sooner rather than later, or if they just end up pushing it off like further down the road.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, because of I think like how the CBA is structured, there might not be an immediate solution
Mhm.
that's implemented right away, and they kind of might just let it play out. But it will be really interesting to see how it kind of unravels here over the next couple years in regards to it. And like
Yeah.
going back to Jonathan Taylor, like I think his extension will be one of the more important contracts in recent NFL history. Like
Mhm.
we've seen Chris Ballard and the Indianapolis Colts give money to players that necessarily play less premium positions, like linebacker and Darius Leonard, like offensive guard and Quentin Nelson, because they're really, really good football players. Jonathan Taylor also falls in that bucket where he's a really good football player. And so if he can get a decent sized contract from Chris Ballard and the Indianapolis Colts where he's able to be at the top of the market in regards to running back deals, then you can start to see maybe a running back market start to form again based on some of
Mhm.
the other high profile running backs we have right now, like Travis Etienne, or depending on how Bijan Robinson or Jameer Gibbs do in their first couple of years. But that'll be the most interesting contract to see play out because you want to reward good football players that you drafted and you developed because that shows a good job for your scouting department and your GM ability to be able to draft these players, as well as it sends a great message to your locker room that if you come here and you play as one of the best players in your position, it doesn't matter the position, we will compensate you as such. So that's I think is something to keep an eye on is when
Mhm.
that Jonathan Taylor extension gets done.
Yeah, and same with Saquon. I know him
Mm-hmm.
and the Giants haven't agreed on anything, but obviously he's one of the best running backs in the league right now. So if they can end up coming to an agreement on an extension, that might also maybe not reset the market, but may give some other running backs a little bit of hope.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. And before we get to our last part here, there was this question from Brandon that when we were talking about the Bills, so he said that he really enjoyed your look at team turnover this offseason. That was a great article, and he's wondering how do you see the Bills covering for the loss of Tremaine Edmonds?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, he's a pretty big loss for them, but they do have some options. They're just not as experienced as Tremaine, and probably not as big. I know AJ Klein is kind of like the dark horse, like contender for his position. He has limited snaps. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but like him and like Tyrell Dodson are probably two of the more experienced guys. And I think from what I've seen through social media is that it'll kind of be a competition during practice is what I've seen. So it would definitely be interesting. And obviously we still have Matt Milano, so that helps. But I think you can't truly replace him. You just have to get the next best guy and hope he can improve and become as good as Tremaine Edmonds. And I think that's the thing you have to remember is that they're not looking to have another Tremaine Edmonds like right now. That's not very realistic. They just have to work with what they got. So I think they definitely. It's like last year they still had a top 5 defense without Von Miller. So I think without Tremaine Edmonds, they'll still be a pretty solid defense.
Mhm. For sure. And yeah, I think Doug McDermott and Leslie Frazier, they did a good job of making sure that the individual opponents components of their defense sum to a greater value than if you just added up the individual
Mhm.
components, right? So I think they always like do a good job through coaching, through scheme
Yeah.
of making sure that that can happen. And then based on some of the scheduled things, they were able to place top 5 in EPA per play. And with Von Miller hopefully playing the full season this
Mhm.
year, I would expect that again from the Bills. But
Yeah,
um,
for sure.
yeah, Amelia, this was really great. I'm so glad that we got to do this. So we talk all the time, on just general football or life stuff. So it was cool to do this similar conversations that we have just on air here on the Sumer Sports Show. For everyone listening out there, be sure to subscribe to the Sumer Sports YouTube channel. You can rate and review the podcast if you are enjoying it. And for everyone else listening out there that doesn't already follow her, make sure to follow Amelia on Twitter. Is your Twitter handle just your full name?
Yeah, at Amelia Probst.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so be sure to do that and then check out all the content she's going to be doing for PFF this year. So, Amelia, if there's anything else you want to promo, really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This has been great. I always love talking football. This is how I have ended it before, so I'll keep it the same. Go Bills.
Thanks, Amelia. I really appreciate it.